Welcome to the Middleware Tech YouTube channel. In this series, you'll learn about Spring Container. All code examples used in the videos will be available on GitHub. Let's get started.
Spring setup. Right? Okay. Right. Now, let's talk about this Spring core container that you're talking about. Setup side. Let's talk about this Spring core container. As I told you that this is the main thing, and this will be our today's content. In details, we'll talk about this core container. Fine. Okay. Now, it has some another one name also. It has some another one name called IOC container. I'll come onto those things and analyzing all those things. I'll come into that. So we're talking about Spring core container. This is Spring core container. You can be thought of as a framework or a particular container for managing business object and their relationship. Now, this core container can be divided into two parts. One is you can say this Spring core container is divided into two type. So Spring core container I can divide into two type. One type of container that is called bin factory container. Bin factory container. These are the very basic level and very preliminary level concept. When you find a very good understanding about them, you'll on the top level also we can get a very good understanding. Another is called application context container. Application context container. So I'm just saying that when I'm talking about the Spring core container, this is Spring core container is two types: bin factory container, application context container. So first, this bin factory container only came. Okay, first this bin factory container only came. So it has some other name. It has some other name. Sometimes we say bin factory container name is called. It is called core container. Okay. It is called core container, and this is called J2E container. J2E container. So it will find different name, right? Sometimes we say this container is called IOC container. I'm coming into that, right? So as I told you that it contains multiple packages. This container, when you're talking about core container, J2E container, so where, as I told you that Spring framework does not use any application server. So Spring has the corresponding jar is already available to create that container, either bin factory or application context. Where is those jars? Those jars is available inside this. Just now we have downloaded, right? Just now we have downloaded this this one. Just now you have downloaded this one. This is for 5.x. This is for 3.x. So if you go inside 5.x, you'll find in the lib folder, lots of jars is there. Lots of jar is there. These actually provide our container, okay, and the related jars. Okay, now first we'll talk about this bin factory container or code container that we talk about. First, this container actually came. So let's talk about this container first. Bin factory container or code container. So whatever the container you find, bin factory container or code container or application container, first before saying anything else and their division, let me just try to explore some point that what this container will do, how this container will work. Or what does it mean by the container? I'm just saying, yes, being container, okay, code container, two types of container. It's fine, but let's before coming into these things, let's understand about the Spring container first. What Spring container will do? How Spring container work in web application? If you have worked on simple servlet JSP, you have already, then that means you have already worked with some web container called Tomcat or Apache, right? So before saying anything else, let's understand how Spring container work or Spring core container work. What are the difference between how a basic core, what the container will do actually, what it will do for us. So if you think that assume the use case you talked about registration, remember, let's understand with layman's language what is the purpose of a Spring core container, how it work. So we are talking about the registration use case, right? Remember we talked about use case, name is registration. That you're talking about, right? That means what? That means client want to do some registration for a game application. Correct? So client send a particular request. Client send a particular request. Client send a particular request. And this request client send for registration. Client want to do registration for a game application. Fine. So the request will come to whom? Client request. Client request will come to a container. Our Spring core container. Our Spring. I'll come with different names step by step. Spring core container. So client will send the request to this container that I want to do a registration for a game application. Fine. So what this container will do? That means if I want to do for registration, so there should be one class called registration.java. Correct. So what this container will do, is that, so assume this is your class registration, class registration. This is your class, and this registration class contain lots of instance variable. It will have lots of instance variable called registration ID, registration name, registration type, registration time, start time, and lots of attribute. I'm not going into that. Right. So lots of attribute is there for your registration. So if I want to take any one of the attribute, int UID, registration ID. One of the attribute is there, like this, a multiple attribute is there inside. This is a registration class. It's a class. It's a Pojo class. Pojo means a simple bean class. Instance variable getters and setters is there. Simple bean class. Okay, fine. Now, when a particular request came, what client is going to request? Client want to do a registration, okay, for a game application. Fine. So client send a request to whom? To a container, a Spring Core container. Right? So what this container will do when the request will come to Spring Core container, what this container will do? When the request will come to Spring Core container, then what this container will do? Container will I have to create one XML file also. Let's see, my XML file name is spring.xml. It's an XML file. Okay. Inside this XML file, I'm creating an object of a particular class. So how I can create an object of a particular class? If I have a registration class, how I can create an object of a particular class? Generally we do registration obj equal to new registration. Generally we create an object of the class like this. When object of the class is ready, then I have to initialize the object. Obj dot set UID, assume we are going to initialize some value, right? Okay, this is the value, something like that. Assume you have some other instance variable in the registration class. Assume that is called a string name. In the registration class, you have another instance variable. Sorry, you have another instance variable called registration name. Right. So this is another instance variable. So, so if you create a particular object, then what you want to do is that you want to initialize this object. You have to initialize this object. So how you can initialize? You can write your obj dot set name, and you can initialize with a particular name called Srini. Now, if you see here, when the request will come to this container, what container will do? As a developer, you can do this task. As a developer, but I don't want as a developer to do this task. I want container to do this task. So if I want container to create registration class object, I want container to do registration class object. I want container to initialize the user ID. I want container to initialize the name. So what I can do is that I can write these details inside this Spring configuration file, in Spring file, inside an element called beans, starting element, and beans closing element. I'm writing some XML file, beans. So inside this beans, what I'm going to do is that I'm going to create an object of the registration class. Okay, bin ID equal to, what is the object name? Just see here, I'm creating a object name is obj, right. What is the class name? Class name is registration. So I'm going to create a class equal to, name of the class is registration. Correct? Like this. Right? So what I have done here, assume I'm not doing any initialization for the time being. So what I have done here, as a developer, we generally create the object like this. but I don't want to do that. I want container to create the object. So when container will do that object, I have to provide this configuration. Bin id equal to obj, class equal to registration. When you write like this, that means I'm saying to the container, please create an object of registration class. The name of the object is obj. So where I've given this statement in the spring.xml file and provide this, so right, then you can initialize. Now what I want to do, if you see that when client request came to the container, when the client request will come to the container, what a container will do? What is the purpose of this core container? Container will read this spring.xml file. Okay, so I'm just writing here first step. Step number 1. Client request comes to the container. Client send request to container. Client send the request to the container. Yes. When the client request came to the container, one client will do. Container will do. Container will read XML file spring.xml with the help of some parser. Already you know, right, how to parse an XML document. The sax parser is there, DOM parser is there. How you can parse an XML document using Java program? We have different parser. So what container will do is that container will read this XML file using sax parser. Okay, what container will do? Container will parse using sax parser. So what this container is doing is that container is using sax parser to parse this XML file. Very simple layman's language, container is going to read the XML file using sax parser. So that is the step 2. The step 2, what it is doing, container read, very simply layman's language, container will read spring.xml. You can use any name, spring.xml, using sax parser. So if any type of, since it's XML document, right? So if any type of mistake inside the document, that container will check the well-formedness of the document. It will validate the XML document, and based on the same error, if any problem is there, fine. So what container is doing, it is going to parse this XML file. What we are doing in the XML file, we are creating an object of the registration class. We're creating object of the registration class. Now see, in normal Java program, you are manually creating object of a registration class, but here I don't want to create the object of the registration class as a developer. I want container should create object of the registration class. I should not create the object of the registration class. I want container to create object of the registration class. Right? So that means, right? I want container to create the object of the registration class. So, right? So when container will create object of the registration class, after that, not only that, container will initialize this object attribute with some values, and those initialization parameter you have to provide here. I'll come into that. So container will create the object of the registration class. Container will create the object of the registration class and send that object. Just give me 1 minute. So container is creating this object. So that right, developer is going to create the object. Content is going to create this object, and right, and send this object to the client. Client have requested for a particular, give me the registration class object. So when client have sent a request that please give me the registration class object, what container is doing is that container is parsing this XML file and creating the registration class object and sending this object to the client. Correct. So here, as a developer, I am not going to create the object. Container is going to create the object. And container will initialize the object also. Right? So what it is doing, container will read the spring.xml file. Right? It will read the spring.xml file. After reading, what it is doing? It is validating this file. It is reading the XML file, right? So after reading, what is doing is step number 3. First, it will load this XML file. If it find some problem with well-formedness, it will send some error. Else it will load. Then it will create an object of registration class. What it is going to do? It is going to create and initialize. Create an object or create an instance in JVM. It will create the object inside the JVM, right? Then after that, what it is going to do? And then it is going to send that object. Not only that, it is going to initialize the object also. I'll come into that. It is going to initialize the object also. I have not written the initialization parameter here. Initialize the object also. Registration class object is going to initialize and send that object to the client. So generally these classes, generally that Spring Framework is going to use, this type of classes we generally implement it as a POJO type. Plain old Java object is nothing but a one type of bean class, right? So what container is doing? IOC container. See here the difference that you'll find interacting with first time with the Spring Framework. I'm just saying like that way that as a developer, I'm not going to create the object. I want container should create the object. I've just written some syntax like this. So container will read this configuration file and it will create an object of a registration class and provide that object to the client and initialize the object also. So what container, what is the purpose? What container will do? If I want to write here, what is the task of core container? What are the task of core container? If I say like this, what are the tasks of core container? Then I'll say that the core container, it is okay. When client will send a particular request, core container will create an object in the JVM. So not only create, it is going to create and initialize an object. So first task I can write here, it is going to create and initialize object in the JVM. That is the first task. Second task of this container is it is going to manage the life cycle of the object. Okay, that object that is going to create is going to manage the life cycle of the object that is created. And not only this, there is one concept called dependency injection. This concept is used to implement dependency injection into POJO classes. It is used to implement dependency injection into POJO classes. DI means dependency injection. Dependency injection is going to implement dependency injection into POJO classes. It's going to implement dependency injection into POJO classes. Now, what is dependency injection? I'll come into that. How container is going to implement life cycle management for your object, I'll come into that. For the time, I'm going to focus on the first point, is that container have this task. These are the tasks. So what? Right, these are the major tasks of your Spring Core container. Now we have to understand that how this core container is going to create and initialize an object. How Spring Core container is going to manage the life cycle of an object. What is the idea behind dependency injection, and how core container is used to implement dependency injection for the POJO classes. So we have to understand this task in details. So from this discussion, what we find is that IOC container task is to create the object, or Spring Core container task is to create an object of a particular class, initialize the object, and initialize the object and send that object to the client who have requested for that particular object. So what we find is that this container is responsible to create the object, not the developer. So that means creation of an object, this task is task of the container. Container is going to create the object and give it to the client, not the developer, because the corresponding syntax is written inside the configuration file, spring.xml file. Based on the syntax that is written inside the spring.xml file, container will go through this and create the object and return giving it to the client. So purpose of this, so that means the control is going to the container. That's why we say sometimes the term called inversion of control. The control to create an object is a task of the container. The control to manage the life cycle of an object is a task of the container. Control to initialize an object is the task of the container. So the object related task is coming to the container. Earlier it was done by the developer. Developer is doing all the tasks. Now container is doing all the tasks. Container is creating the object. Container is initializing or injecting the object attribute inside the POJO class. Container is managing the lifecycle of the object. That's why you'll find one term called IOC. IOC full name is inversion of control. That's why we use the term not core container, we use the term called IOC container. I've written core container, right? So best option is that try to always use IOC container, inversion of control of creating an object, initializing an object, managing the life cycle of an object is the task of the container. So that inversion of control, IOC, that is the meaning of full name, right? So that's why this container name which multiple technical documentation. If you go, you'll find that the container name will come as an IOC container. Okay, the container name will come as an IOC container. Okay, so what we'll understand here is that we'll talk about that how just now we talked about there's two types of container is there. One is called bin factory container, another is called application context container, right? Fine. So first we'll talk about bin factory container and try to understand how bin factory container will create an object, okay, for a Pojo class. So we try to focus this part here is that we'll talk about this part. We'll talk about this bin factory container. Bin factory container. How bin factory container we can use to create an object of a class. Initialize an object. Right. So let's understand this first. Then I'll come after that. We'll come to the application context container, and then we talked about the difference between them. Correct. So what I'm going to do is that we'll try to get a small example now how bin factory container will work to create an object of a particular class. It is one type of IOC container. Actually, first time this bin factory container only came. First time when Spring Framework came, this bin factory container came actually, right? So to see this, how bin, so what you're going to talk about, how bin factory container work. How bin factory container is going to create an object of a particular class that we want to see. So to do that one, first what you have to do, just now we talked about, first what you have to do, I have to create a Pojo class. Yes, so number one, create Java class. My class name should be registration, not the package name. So just delete them. And let me create once again, right click, new class. So what is the name of the class? Registration. And assume the package name is Pepe. And this is my class, simple registration class. For the time being, I don't want to create any instance variable. I want to create a small one default constructor so that if the object created, I can understand control that the object is created. Control C, control V. If the object created, I can understand yes, object is created. So you can do one thing. You can just print something here. System dot out dot println, okay, and just write here registration object created or registration constructor, registration default constructor. So when this default constructor will be called, that time only the object will be created, right? So what I have done here is that I have created one class called registration. Inside the registration class, I have just created one constructor, default constructor. That's it. That's it, right? So this is the first task we have done. That means we have created this class first. Next, what you have to do is that I have to create this configuration file spring.xml. Okay, and provide these details. So what I have to do is that create an so to create a configuration file, you have to create that configuration file inside a package called, generally we use the term called resources, where I have to create this spring.xml. So right click, new file, select that file as spring.xml. and finish. So I have created a spring.xml file here, right? Save it. So when you create an XML file, as you know that XML file, when interacting with the XML file, the top of the XML, you have to provide the grammar for the XML file. Now, from where I'll get the grammar? Grammar can be written in XSD as well as DTD. Since we are doing the basic application, right, how bean factory work container is going to work. So we are going to use the grammar that is being provided using DTD. And where is the grammar? Grammar for your XML. So that grammar is already provided in our API itself. API. So where it is, if you go here, just go inside a particular jar. Its name is Spring Beans. Okay, you go inside the Spring Beans. You'll find here Spring Beans factory. Go inside the Spring Beans factory. Sorry, Spring Beans factory XML. This one. If you go, you'll find one file called springbeans.dtd. Go inside springbeans.dtd and select the line number called 36 and 37. Okay. So just copy this two line. This is the grammar already given. So always try to copy it because never write this grammar manually. Small mistake, it will not work. Always try to copy it. Okay, as we have done it here. Now what I want to do is that I have to create an object of the registration class. So the root element is beans and the other element called bin. So inside the bin, I'm going to create an object of which class? Registration class, right? So create an object. So bin id equal to obj. Okay, and class equal to, you can use pp dot, what is the name of the class? Registration. Okay, fine. So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to create an object of the registration class. That's it. Creating an object of the registration class. For this, I've just given some syntax. That's it. And there is no error, right? Right click, you can write here. There is no error, right? Fine. You can remove this file. So what we have done, we have created the Java class. Yes. Okay, the spring.xml file. Right. Now what I'm going to do is that I'm going to create a client. So create a client file. Here only, right click, new class, and write here client. So client send a request that client want, it's the main method. Client want an object of registration class, and the registration class object is created by the IOC container. Correct. So what I want to do here is that, so we are talking about bean factory container. We're talking about bean factory container, right? Okay, so you can create an object of bean factory. Bin factory bf equal to new. Sorry, bin factory. I have to create an object of bin factory. New class path resource. Class path resource, and just write here resources slash This is the resources folder, right? Spring.xml. Spring.xml. So what I am doing is that in this line, I'm loading the spring.xml file. I'm loading a spring.xml file, right, in this line. And the related the classes you can import. Import this as well as import bin factory and save it. Right. Now class path resource is a part of warg.springframework.core.io package, and the bin factory that we have used is a part of warg.springframework.bins.factory package, right? So in this line, what we have done, still now we have some errors. It is saying that you have to typecast. So do one thing here, just right here. Sorry, it is not correct. I have to create an object of first resource, not bin factory. Resources. Resource. I have to just import the corresponding package. Yes, this one. Try to use org.springframework.core. So first I have created an object of resource rs equal to new class path resource this. And now when I got the resource, now I have to create an object of bin factory container. So you can write here bin factory. Okay, bin factory FAC equal to new XML bin factory, XML bin factory resources, and you can save it. XML bin factory is like this. Now you can see here that some of the things are deprecated. Yes, it is deprecated because this is the container that came first time long back. Since it came first time, that's why you're going to use this. Generally don't use in the actual development environment, but we should understand how bin factory container will work. Based on that, I'm using this. Now if you see here, I have created an object of bin factory here. And what this bin factory container is doing, it is going to load the spring.xml file. Correct? Okay. So that, right? So let me execute it. Let me check what it is giving the output. If you execute, now see in this example, I have executed. In this example, I have executed. Now, when I've executed, are you getting anything else in the console? Nothing gets printed. Nothing gets printed. Nothing gets printed. Right? So when you are loading the configuration file, that means nothing gets printed means this constructor not yet called. If you create the object, this constructor will be called. That means in this line, objects not yet created. Right? Objects not yet created. Now I'm sending a client request calling fac.getBin. When I'm using fac.getBin, then you're going to provide the object. What is the object name? Object name is obj. Just write obj. Right now, what I'm going to do here in this line, client request came. Client request, and save it. Right click, run as Java application. Now you can see here, when client request came, that time bin factory container is creating the object and giving it to the client. How bin factory container is going to work? This example only. Client request is sending a request to the container. Container is going to parse this file, create the object, and give it to the client. That only we are doing it here using bin factory container. Bin factory container is going to load the configuration file. When client request come, that time it is going to parse, create the object, and send it to the client. So when the object is created, when client request came, that time container created the object and sent it to the client. Correct? And how to understand that container has created the object or not? You can see from the constructor. When the constructor is called, that means container created the object. Correct? So this is a very simple example to understand that how bin factory container work. Bin factory is an IOC container. It is a container that came first time. That's why you find this deprecated method, but we generally don't use in our enterprise level application. In enterprise level application, you always use application context container, not this bin factory container, right? So I'll come into that application context container. Since it is the initial phase, we have to just understand the concept behind how Spring IOC container work. And here in this example, we have used bin factory container. So what we find here is that bin factory container, when the client request will come, bin factory container is going to parse this spring.xml file. And in this spring.xml file, it is written, bin factory container is going to create an object of registration, and then it is going to return that object to the client. When the object is created, then only the constructor is called, and we can see in the console that registration default constructor is called. Correct. So in this example, we try to understand how bin factory container work. Right. So in the next step, we'll talk about how application context container work or JTE container work, and how we can differentiate between both of them. How bin factory container will work. In the next phase, we'll talk about how application context container will work. And what is the difference between bin factory container and IOC application context container, as well as different scope also try to explore. But before moving forward, I'll suggest please create this setup in your individual system. Since we are talking about the very basic part, so I'll suggest that please create this setup in your individual system and check that this basic application is running in your system. Because step by step, lots of things is going to come one by one. Fine. So I'll suggest please create this setup in your system. Now we talked about bin factory container, and after next we'll go for break, and after break we'll talk about application context container. What is the difference between them? The different scope is available, and step by step we're going to move. But the thing is that this basic setup should work, and anyone getting any error regarding the setup, you can send me a message in the communication window. Always I'll suggest, if anyone have any queries, you can send your queries into the communication window. I'll try to add everyone. I try to respond to everyone queries. Always try to send, if anyone have any queries or any error related to your code, always share in the communication window. I'll try to add in our discussion. Okay. Fine, guys. Anyone want to add something more? No one? Okay. So guys, we'll go for break. We'll take a break, and after break, we'll move with the next part. And in the meantime, I'll suggest please create this basic setup, because lots of code is going to come step by step. You'll see, and as we talked about the Spring framework, we try to talk about all the features using some code, using some program. We try to understand all the features, right? Okay, so next we'll go for break. Now it is 3:45. We'll take a break. Now we're going to start exactly at about 4:15. Fine, guys. Anything else? Anyone want to add? Fine. So we'll go for break and we'll start exactly about 4:15. So, okay, guys, let's start after break, and let's move with our Spring framework. And if you remember, before break we talked about bin factory container. And next, what we find in the bin factory container, if you see, we talked about IOC container have three major tasks. One is that it is going to parse the XML file based on the client request and create the object and initialize the object. Second task is that IOC container is used to manage the life cycle of the object, right? And third is it is used to implement dependency injection into POJO classes. So I'm just talking about the first part now. Second part and third part are not yet came. Only I'm talking about the first part. Create and initialize the object. Now in this first part, what we're talking about here is that we talked about two types of container, bin factory container, how it work. And we have executed a good lab, small lab, good lab. We talked about how bin factory container work. Next, I'm talking about application context container. Sometimes we say it is a core container. And core container. Next, I'm talking about application context container. Sometimes we say it is a J2E container, right? And we'll see the difference. So let me talk about then how application context container work and what is the difference between bin factory container and application context container, right? So what we find in case of bin factory container in our last example, if you see in the bin factory container, what we find, if you see this code, let me execute it once again. Let me disable this, save it, right click, run as Java application. If you execute this code, you can see here, at the time of loading, object is not created, right? At the time of loading, it will check the XML doc, but object not created, right? When your client request comes, if you see here, when client request comes, if you execute, then object created. So at the time of loading, object not created. When client request comes, then object created, correct? So that you're talking about first. In case of bin factory container, at the time of loading the configuration file, it will not create object, bin factory container. So when the object is created, when request come, then it will create the object. When request come, then our bin factory container create object, right? When the request come, then bin factory container will create object. That's it. That is about bin factory container. Next, I'm talking about application context container. So in case of application context container, also we have the same thing. You have to create a Java class, create a configuration file, you have to send a client request. Let me check how application context container will work. Control V. So for each and every task, we'll create a separate project. Let me close this three. And I'm going to create a Spring IOC application context. Let me get another one project. File, new Java project. Project name is Spring IOC application context. Spring IOC application context, right? This is my project name. Fine. It is using the JDK 8. Move next. I'm creating the core Java project. Yes, project created. So already you know, after creating the project, you have to add all the jars. So add all the jars. Maven implementation I'll show. Let me do today jar only. Just add all the jars. Now here, fine. Next, what you have to do? These are the tasks. You have to create a bin class. You have to create a spring.xml and client. So create a Java class. Right click, new class. So we are using the class name as registration, right? Registration. So in this class, you can just put one constructor. Just put one constructor. And here just write system dot out dot println default constructor. Just write something. Default constructor. So this is the class. This is a constructor. Fine. Now this constructor look like this. Save it. Next, what I have to do? Next, I have to create a spring.xml file. So how to create a spring.xml file? Just select src, right click, new file. Just write here spring. You can use some other name also. You can use some other name also. Spring.xml. Finish. Now when you create a spring.xml file, I have to put the grammar. Where is the grammar? Already we talked about last time. Grammar we are going to collect from here. I'll suggest don't write the grammar manually. Always try to copy because there is always a possibility of getting error if you write it manually. So just copy it from your API doc jars itself to spring beans.ddd and just copy this line numbers line number 36 and line number 37. Just copy this to line. Control C, Control V. And save it. Fine. Okay. Now what I have to do, I have to create an object of registration class. So already I talked about that you have to create a bin as a root element, and inside bin you have to create an object of bin. So bin ID equal to obj, okay, and name equal to, what is the name of the class? Name of the class is registration. Registration, that's it, and save it. Next I have to do one thing, I have to create a client. So let's create a client, right click, new class. Class name is client.java. Now what I want to do is that, now this time I'm talking about application context container. This time I'm talking about application context container. If you want to, okay, this time I'm talking about application context container. So what I have to do here is that you have to get an object of application context container. Application context AC equal to new class path application context. So this is how we have to create an object of application context container. Control X, class path XML application context. Control V. So when I'm going to create this application context container, it is here you have to use class path XML. Okay, and save it. You have to import, and you have to import this one also. Save it. Fine. Now you have, what you're doing here is that you have created an object of application context, right? Now it should load the corresponding string.xml. Fine. So it should load. Now string.xml always I'll suggest to create inside a folder called resources. Should not put it like this. So create a particular folder. Right click, new, package. Resources, finish, and put this inside the resources like this, right? Fine. Now when you're going to load, you have to just provide the path here itself, resources slash spring.xml. Spring.xml. Fine. So first I've created an object of application context container. So this is what you're going to load. This is a loading phase. This is a loading phase, right? I'm going to load the configuration file. Okay, so let me check it's working or not. Right click, run as Java application. Okay, it is saying that bean class specified in the bean identification. So here, check the class name. It is saying that creating an object obj defined in the class path resource failed. No bean class specified in the bean identification. Fine. Now here, this is your bean class. Bean class name is registration. This is defined in the PP package. So when you come to Spring dot, now here I have to provide PP dot registration. Just save it and just execute once again. Now it is saying that no bin class specified resources slash spring.xml. You're going to load this spring.xml file. This is your registration class, and the registration class is defined inside the pp package as you have done last time. Class equal to pp.registration. Same things you are doing here also. Sorry, this is the name of the class. Class equal to pp.registration. It should work. Right click, run as Java application. So if you see here, now talking about application context container. So in case of application context container, when it is going to load the XML file, that time the object created. See here, object created when you are going to load the XML file. Correct? Object created when you are going to load the XML file. Right? So if you want to change, just see this statement, what we have written here is that in case of application context container, at the time of loading, it will not create object in case of bin factory container. But in case of application, see the difference. Where is the difference? So what you find in case of application context container, at the time of loading, it will create object. Right? So at the time of loading, it is going to create the object. So object created is done. See here, right? Now if the client request comes, like ac.get bin, when the client request comes, yes, object should be there. So object obj, it's okay. When the client request come, it's fine, right? And it will provide the corresponding object to the client. It's okay. But the object is created in case of application context container. In case of application context container, the object is created at the time of loading. Correct? So this is the difference that you're talking about, how you can differentiate between bin factory container and application context container. First point is that in case of bin factory container is used for legacy application, means very older one or initial one. Okay, this bin factory container, initial one. You cannot do any J2E application using bin factory container. No. For a small application, you can use to create, but not for J2E application. So if you want to work for J2E application, then you have to use application context container. Right? So this is one of the difference we can say. Second difference we can say J2E application. If I want to execute Java J2E application, then you have to go for application context container. But if you're not going for Java J2E, for simple applications, you can go for bin factory container. So this is how you can differentiate. So always we go for application context container because lots of advanced features, schema, annotations, lots of advanced features of our IOC container is supported with the help of application context container only. So it is just an initial one for understanding purpose is okay. But if you're working on actually production environment, you always go with application context container.